please introduce yourself when you're ready for the record, and you have 10 minutes for your presentation.
The presentation.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup. Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Nishan Duryappa, and I am the Chief of Police for Peel Regional Police Service in Ontario and the former Deputy Chief for Halton Regional Police Service. I'm pleased to be here today with my co-panelists to present on the CRTC's review of mobile services. We'll be focusing our submission today on the growing importance of and the role of reliable mobile data communications in the context of daily 911 emergency services across tri-services, first responders, municipalities, and critical infrastructure entities across Canada. It's my pleasure to introduce my co-presenters, who consist of leaders from a cross-section of public safety agencies, associations, critical infrastructure, and communities, which you'll see outlined on the slide. In the interest of time, I won't go through everybody's name. Public safety communication needs have seen a rapid evolution and operational revolution in the past decade, and significant increases in the reliance on broadband data as part of emergency services and day-to-day operations. In our collective experience providing emergency services, we can confidently state that data has become as important to emergency services as voice communications. From text messages and data files to video and photos, through new applications that provide for better frontline efficiency and coordination in life-saving missions to society. Emergency responders require reliable access to data during the minutes and seconds that can make the difference between life and death. We need telecom services that resiliently survive all manner of disasters, both human and natural, and the ability for communications to survive in the face of new modern issues such as cybersecurity. Unfortunately, commercial broadband services around the world have been shown to provide a level of resiliency and reliability below the threshold required by first responders and critical infrastructure entities during our times of needs. We therefore suggest that enabling a pro-MVNO telecom policy in Canada will provide emergency services with an added technology tool that permits first responders to seamlessly collaborate and coordinate in disasters and during surges of traffic seen during large public events. Our interest and vision is that the CRTC Mobile Wireless Review pertains to a series of transformative policy and infrastructure decisions happening this year, and that's related to a Canadian Public Safety Broadband Network, or PSBN, and key generational decisions related to setting up a reliable, resilient, and cyber-secure framework for emergency responders communication over the next several decades. ISED has allocated 20 megahertz of spectrum in the band class 14, or the 700 megahertz spectrum, for the experimental and future operational use by public safety. This valuable spectrum was reserved for public safety in light of the tragic deaths of hundreds of first responders during the September 11, 2001 attacks in New York City, where access to reliable data could have saved hundreds of lives of first responders and civilians during the evacuation of the towers during that disaster. Key decisions on the technology and business model for the Canadian PSBN and the future course and effectiveness of first responder communications in Canada are going to be made in 2020. We submit that permitting a small and specialized class of public safety MVNOs is a key enabling technology tool to ensure always available data communications for emergency responders.
Thank you, Chief. My name is Anthony O'Doherty. I'm a superintendent with the Halton Regional Police. Reliability, resilience, cybersecurity, cost effectiveness, and interoperability are the theme of what we're here talking today. The revolution in data needs for first responders are going to grow. In fact, they're upon us. With near-term enhancements to next generation 911 in the next couple years. In fact, here today, we're seeing changes also including enabling voice over IP-based services and an exponential growth in data sources that are fast approaching first responders today. If we're to accept then that next generation 911 and all these and the growth of digital sources are essential for community safety and well-being, and that the upstream path of that data from civilians requires resiliency so that data can reach our call takers, then the same is true for the downstream path of those sources to reliably reach our first responders, our frontline people out working. Without broadband connectivity that reliably gets 911 data to frontline emergency personnel, effectiveness and reliability of coordinated 911 services are diminished and at jeopardy. So given the generational explosive growth in data use for first responders and issues related to commercial-grade telecom reliability, our vision for public safety communication stems from a desire to ensure, and these are key for us, public safety agency oversight and collaboration on strategic direction, initiatives, and operations surrounding a shared public safety LTE core. Canada's emergency services, although small, representing a small portion of the commercial telecom system, represent a critical facet of overall telecommunication users in our country and an important arena to CRTC policy reviews and the parallel legislative reviews of the Broadcasting and Telecommunications Act, which can help address important issues to assist mission-critical efforts on behalf of all first responders. As part of our commitment and concern for reliable communications, a rapidly growing non-for-profit association of first responder agencies, municipalities, like-minded commercial and non-governmental partners has been established. We will talk about that in a moment. To advocate for reliable communication policy, focused changes to the Telecommunications and Radio Communications Act that take into account the specific needs of public safety, what our citizens have come to expect and demand. Our rapidly growing non-for-profit association, named the PSBN Innovation Alliance, encompasses lead responder agencies and critical infrastructure entities that cover over 3 million of Canadians and growing daily, which I am the executive director of. Our members support telecommunications policy, business models, and technology innovations that help establish a level of communication reliability need for 911 response. You will hear that we are also firm advocates for policies that help bridge the rural and remote broadband digital divide in Canada, business models and partnerships that bring new capital to bear on this critical issue.
Thank you, Commissioners. My name is Phil Chernko. I am president of Black Castle Networks and Engineering Consultancy. In our collective view, there are several key areas we need to focus on improving in a holistic network approach that would provide 4G and 5G service resiliency for first responders, including a focus on rural and remote broadband enablement, reliability for first responders, resiliency, high-cost service rates, cybersecurity from a holistic systems view. Public safety MVNOs, or PS MVNOs, can be a key innovative enabler for better reliability of communications for emergency responders. PS MVNOs effectively create a digital right-of-way to help 911 life-saving services in times of need. As noted in our written submission and also in the submissions of the Canadian Electricity Association and the Rail Association of Canada, MVNOs offer a technical architecture that is better able to withstand outages of individual MNOs. Put simply, MVNOs permit stacking the reliabilities and availabilities of several carriers, one on top of the other, to get a net better level of signal strength and system reliability than any individual MNO. The PS MVNO model is an effective concept that has been proven and implemented in other jurisdictions in the world. Indeed, in a recent study on MVNO performance in the United States market, a report by Tutela has confirmed that the concept of stacked reliability were reported in their October 2019 State of the MVNO paper that MVNO performance measured across all 50 states have shown an ability to be as good and even better than Tier 1 MNOs. This superior performance stems from an ability of MVNO users with multiple roaming agreements to effectively jump to the best signal level and the best network in any given location, thereby always maintaining the best level performance for their users. This MVNO concept of providing first responder access to the best signal in any given location effectively amounts to a digital right-of-way, in a similar manner that an emergency responder's vehicle sirens and lights provide a right-of-way in the real world on our highways and roads. Besides the performance advantages that a PSMVNO policy has for first responders, the relatively high cost of telecom in Canada, shown over years of international studies, also impacts the operational budgets of first responders. Chronic high costs due to competitive skew in the Canadian telecom marketplace in turn draws valuable operational budget dollars away from critically needed 911 field resources, staff, and equipment.
Thank you, Phil. Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Bill Payne. I'm the Director of Information Technology for the Halton Regional Police Service. The advantages of PSMVNOs run across both operational and financial considerations. Our financial modeling has shown that a pro-market-driven approach to a PSBN in Canada, which includes enabling PSMVNO services, can result in operational cost savings of between $2 and $4 billion in the sample case of the province of Ontario over a 20-year operational period. These projected savings are considered to be a conservative view given the growing use of data anticipated for first responders due to next-generation 911 services and represent funds that will go back into the budgets of first responder agencies to buy essential equipment, apparatus, or vehicles for emergency response and to hire more frontline staff for 911 life-saving response. Our proposed hybrid PSBN model consists of a network of networks approach with an ability to roam via PSMVNO services on multiple, if not all, MNOs in Canada through roaming agreements with CRTC established fair market rates for specialized PSMVNO service with an ability to connect to 4G and 5G networks and traditional land mobile radio networks. Recent successful testing conducted between both Halton Regional Police Service PSBN and land mobile radio networks and the Telesat Low Earth Orbit Satellite Network, a technical first in Canada, has demonstrated the effectiveness of our network of networks approach. A network of networks model provides resilient communications and extends the reach of first responders. By giving municipalities and their first responder agencies the flexibility to license and monetize band class 14 spectrum in PSBNs in the manner best suited to their diverse regional needs, with PSMVNOs as an architectural tool for reliability and cost savings, we can assure that valuable spectrum resources are flexibly deployed in a manner that best meets the diverse needs of Canadian communities. Our PSBN model consists of a two-tiered choice for municipalities and provinces to select the spectrum deployment model that is most effective. The model includes a place for MNOs, and yet with a strong competitive framework between MNOs and PSMVNO service providers. It's about choice in how band class 14 is deployed and monetized in a given community. In turn, to maximize competitive forces, flexibility, and choice for first responder agencies, we propose a second optional MNO-oriented licensing and PSBN service approach that provides municipalities the market-driven option to obtain PSBN services from MNOs also.
Thanks, Bill. I'm Sean Slack. I'm the Chief Information Officer for the City of Mississauga. From an IT municipal services stance, a pro-public safety MVNO policy enacted by the CRTC gives regional municipalities more market choice and competitive options in our current marketplace. This choice helps drive down costs and serves to align Canada with other G7 countries and the majority of G20 nations around the world that have had strong MVNO markets for the past several decades, providing both facility and virtualized competitive services. Canada remains one of the very few industrialized countries on Earth without an MVNO model. On the balance of analysis, a pro-public safety MVNO policy can help solve the problems we noted earlier in our presentation, namely rural broadband. Our policy proposals leverage band class 14 spectrum, which has been made available to first responders and municipalities, to permit deploying the public safety use case in rural areas where it makes sense for community safety needs. Coupled with new sources of P3 capital investment, our model creates new facilities-based competition via the 700 megahertz spectrum. Municipalities can partner with both critical infrastructure, example, rail and transit and utilities, and public safety as part of an existing smart city or smart rural programs to gain a trifecta win that solves both the need for reliable public safety access, provides municipalities with new tools through spectrum, along with a PS MVNO business model that provides cost savings on municipal broadband. This approach also enables rural and urban broadband infrastructure in areas where MNOs decline to invest today and achieves a better net service resiliency than a single carrier. On reliability, as noted earlier, the PS MVNO concept permits stacking multiple MNOs where existing commercial service providers exist, or to layer band class 14 PSBN networks on top of incumbent MNO services or in partnership with incumbent MNOs in a given region. This helps build a more robust layer of survivable infrastructure. Resiliency. A strategy for the first responders that builds a skeleton of highly ruggedized band class 14 sites, coupled with PS MVNO services to permit first responders to jump to the best available signal strength, enables the digital right-of-way concept for data that we've described, the better survivability for public safety than relying on a single MNO today. High cost. The chronic problem can be alleviated by permitting new sources of competition. Canada's telecom market continues to exhibit constrained competition, where the three main incumbent MNOs command a market power with a significant majority of the national mobile wireless market. Where this power dynamic constrains competition, in our view, requires ongoing regulatory review by the CRTC to ensure market forces are viable for the long term. And lastly, cybersecurity. With a growing risk of cyber attacks, it is incumbent for Canada to build a secure and survivable telecom network for times of crisis and disaster response, where reliable and secure communications help in the minutes and seconds that count in emergencies.
Good afternoon. Chris Mitchell, I'm Associate Director of Airport Operations for the Greater Toronto Airports Authority, the operator of Toronto Pearson. We are pleased to note that our recommendations for PSBN band class 14 and PS MVNO policy are aligned with the views of the Canadian Electrical Association, the Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police, the Rail Association of Canada, and the Ontario Professional Firefighters Association, as well as the membership of the PSBN Innovation Alliance. We also in turn firmly endorse and support the RAC and the CEA proposals for PVNO services in Canada. Critical infrastructure entities also often bring significant telecom assets in rural and remote regions, such as fiber backhaul links in Northern Ontario, where no commercial cell service exists today. In partnering, we can share PSBN costs and leverage fiber assets across critical infrastructure organizations. We also reduce the burden on government and taxpayers in building a secure 5G PSBN asset for Canada, and yet obtain the required level of reliability in critical communications where lives are on the line. At the Greater Toronto Airports Authority, we are firm believers in the risk mitigation benefits that a sound public safety MVNO and public safety broadband policy can provide. As a mission-critical entity, the GTAA understands firsthand the impact of communications breakdowns and how failures in communications can lead to catastrophic results to society. As a personal anecdote which highlights the critical importance of coordinated and reliable communications, the GTA experienced major communications failures on cellular services during the Air France Flight 358 disaster at the airport in 2005 due to a surge in network traffic. During the crisis, cellular service ground to a halt with very significant impacts on operational effectiveness during the event.
Good afternoon. My name is Susan Payne. I work for Peel Regional Police, and I'm the manager of VCOM and Support Services. Our proposed PS MVNO concept combines the strategic use of band class 14 and hybrid PS MNO approach, which can help in many emergency scenarios, ranging from special events and high-density gatherings. And as an example of cases where combined PS MVNO and band class 14 could have helped, include the very recent Raptors Victory Parade, where broadband communications experienced serious access issues. Also, in cases of ad hoc evacuations, where networks experience surges of users on limited RF site capacity, including school and high-rise building evacuations, where large numbers of civilians can congregate and overwhelm limited commercial sites. Crisis events, where commercial telecom infrastructure is damaged, or where power outages exceed the relatively short levels of battery backup at commercial sites, or where infrastructure is down due to a lack of resiliency in core architectures or links to cores. Additionally, special events and emergencies where seamless coordination and data sharing across tri-services and secondary responders is essential to saving lives, where minutes and seconds can mean the difference between life and death. In order to help address these risks and challenges to public safety communications, Halton and Peel Police have embarked on an innovative path for first responder communications with the first multi-regional public safety broadband network in Canada, providing coverage and resilient first responder communications in a region that covers over 2 million Canadians. We are also pleased to note our work with the Canadian Electricity Association in a series of ongoing inter-PSBN core tests with public safety and utilities innovating and collaborating together between our PSBN in Ontario and the PowerTech-hosted PSBN in British Columbia, with the multi-core PSBN test showcasing security, resiliency, and reliability in communications.
Good afternoon. I'm Dave Lazenby, Fire Chief with the Burlington Fire Department. From a Tri-Services stance, reliable broadband communications has never been more important to saving lives on a daily basis in Canada. We're pleased to note that our fast-growing coalition within the PSBN Innovation Alliance includes the significant support of a number of public safety associations and agencies, including the Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police and the Ontario Professional Firefighters Association. Reliable communications saves lives and makes sense from a CRTC policy stance. Our proposed hybrid model PSBN would provide Canadians with many advantages, including improved reliability, resiliency and cybersecurity for first responder communications, support to help bridge the rural broadband divide, support to critical infrastructure entities in municipalities such as healthcare, transit, rail, utilities, airports and public works, a maximum market-driven choice for municipalities, maximum fostering of market innovation and technology innovation, and maximum optimisation of costs by permitting innovative market solutions.
We'd like to conclude our presentation with the following 4 key recommendations for the CRTC to consider in the development of a telecom policy that can help save lives and help emergency responders. First, to permit a PS public safety MVNO model for public safety, focused on the niche emergency responder community. Number 2, establish competitive wholesale PS MVNO rates for emergency responders as a specialized CRTC MVNO rate at or below commercial rates given our life-saving mission, with CRTC involvement in rate establishment negotiations with carriers as well. Number 3, further consider our additional detailed legislative recommendations which we've submitted for the Radio Communications and Telecommunications Acts, including the perspective of emergency responder needs within the Acts. Number 4, to mandate and facilitate a special case for public safety roaming, given our public safety life-saving mission, and permit the following key technical elements: MNC allocation and intersystem roaming, seamless roaming, special cooperation with public safety, potentially network sharing, access to MNO VoLTE services, access to MNO 4G and 5G networks. We'd like to sincerely thank the commissioners and the CRTC staff for their time today, and we remain available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. Where to begin? I might just make a note with respect to your summary of proposed CRTC and government policy actions that obviously the CRTC does not have a direct role in amendments to the Radiocom Telecommunications Act. That is the work of parliamentarians and the Minister for Industry. So we'll leave that one aside. I appreciate the suggestions that you've made, and I know you made them to the expert panel as well. So we'll just note that. I'd like to start by just having you give me a little more of an explanation of what a nonprofit public safety MVNO would look like. I'm assuming this is fairly comparable to the FistNet services in the U.S.
Good afternoon. Again, Anthony O'Duarte, and I'll be directing the questions to our subject matter experts on the panel so that we save some time for you folks in comment. Phil, I'll turn that over to you.
Certainly, thank you, Anthony. And so, quite simply, you're correct in that it's an analog to the FirstNet system, which is in the United States. However, Our proposal is that Canada has different needs given the different population density and diverse geographic needs across Canada. And so as a result, we propose a flexible framework that at its core has a shared core model for municipalities and provinces so that they can essentially share on costs similar to a co-op model at a very broad and high level, and allows municipalities to share those central costs for connectivity into the cores and allow them in turn to plug in RANs that they can, for example, monetize in the fashion that is most appropriate for their needs. And also to solicit and procure equipment with P3 partners, public-private partnerships. And for example, we have had interest from several venture capital institutions and institutional investors that would certainly provide billions of dollars for the build-out of these networks that would be, again, constructed to a higher level of resiliency, reliability, and cybersecurity than we currently have with the MNO networks. So the twist is that it is a model that is actually analogous to the approach that land mobile radio networks take in municipalities today. So municipalities in many of our jurisdictions have oversight and deploy these land mobile radio networks independent from mobile network operators.
But they've built those networks for themselves. They're not using the networks of other providers.
There's
Correct.
interoperability and certainly coordination with network providers that do also have land mobile radio networks as well.
But take a step back. Just what are the differences between your approach and FirstNet in the U.S.?
So our approach provides the oversight into the hands of public safety communications.
As opposed to the network operator.
Correct, yes. So it's the control which we feel is so important. Again, in times of need, we've seen countless examples where, left to their own devices, commercial operators will build based on a motivation of profit and not necessarily providing the overbuild required to handle those corner cases where you have surges of traffic that overwhelm the networks. And so we have countless examples of where there's a different level of construction and engineering. For example, we could cite recent examples such as Hurricane Dorian, where networks were down for days, certainly, and we contrast that with the build of land mobile radio networks, which survived far better than the carrier networks in those particular examples. And there are many other examples that have occurred in recent history as well.
You may have answered this question in part, but if the Commission were to go forward and mandate full MVNO access under one of the other models that have been proposed to us, why is that not sufficient to meet your needs?
So again, it stems from the commercial motivations. We think that public safety needs to have a direct hand and involvement in establishing the criteria and standards, similar to how they have been directly involved in the land mobile radio networks. And we feel it's that oversight that has allowed land mobile radio networks in large part to survive better in these crisis situations, in these surge conditions that occur.
Is the carriers work together through Emergency Preparedness Canada and do have a number of activities to coordinate among themselves in the case of emergencies. Why doesn't that respond to the public safety component of this?
So, maybe Anthony, if you wanted to.
As Phil has indicated, despite sitting on these committees and participating in these organizations, we've cited several examples throughout the presentation where the reliability factor just hasn't been there. And so to leave it solely in the hands of the carriers in the greatest times of need, and we don't want to overstate that this is just about critical incidents and disasters, but this is about everyday, day-to-day uses where surges and the reliability of the network needs to come through. We don't feel right leaving that solely in the hands of the carriers. Our participation in making those rules and regulations and standards and policies we think is critical and essential to delivering on our mission critical needs.
If I may add as well, from a public safety communication standards point of view, we design our sites very differently from how a carrier would, for instance. So they're hardened sites with generators, they're monitored. We have multiple diverse routes. and service levels that we contract to for those sorts of things. And it's those disciplines that really make a very large difference in reliability and predictability of networks.
And in your view, it's not possible to contract with commercial providers to obtain a higher and necessary standard of service? I assume carriers have contractual arrangements with the Department of National Defense and other customers who demand particularly onerous conditions of service.
In our experience, it's been best effort, sort of commercial approach to that sort of coverage. And it's very difficult to predict when and where an incident will happen. As you know, we've talked about in our presentation, it's the day-to-day use case as well as the emergency sort of disaster. And so designing a network from the ground up that has that sort of resilience built in is, it's not an option not to do that in a public safety sort of approach.
And if you had such PVNO access, would you use the service to deploy handsets to personnel in the field?
Yes, we would. In our initial tests, our initial tests today are on a mobile design network, which is performing quite well, and it would be our plan to have areas of coverage where it makes sense under band 14, under a private network, and then be able to use the PSMVNO relationships to be able to ensure coverage in those worst case scenarios where we either need to leave an area or where there are other disasters affecting other pieces of infrastructure.
And would this connect with and communicate with conventional smart devices?
It would, absolutely. Yeah.
And then I guess the logical question is, if you're deploying handsets, would you be willing and able to comply with all of the typical obligations imposed by government and the Commission on carriers?
Yes, we would, and certainly elements such as Next Generation 911, which are new standards coming for facilitating digital engagement with civilians during crisis situations. So new data or digital-driven elements such as SMS text, video calls, and data file transmissions to first responders in the course of 911 calls. So absolutely.
If I could, sorry, sir, if I could also top up, and Mr. Sean Slack could weigh in on this. We speak about this at length in our Innovation Alliance meetings as to audit standards in terms of regulations.
So thank you, Anthony. And so I think what we talked about was really the requirements to be able to have a multi-agency response with the interoperability for the everyday. So when you've got fire, EMS, transit, utilities, and traffic all responding as a multi-agency response to an incident, that's the everyday use case that drives the ROI for this type of solution. And I think that's really why you want to have the public safety aspect, to have a hand on the implementation and operations of this MBO model.
Thank you. I'm struggling a little bit. Essentially, what you've told me is that commercial networks provide reasonable reliability for everyday services, but not for the exceptional circumstances. But your proposal still relies on the very same networks. I'm just not adding 2 and 2 together to reach 5.
So let me help you get to 4. So essentially,
that would be a good start.
So essentially, it's the stacked reliability concept. So where the individual reliability of a single MNO may not be sufficient, when you have the ability to stack one on top of the other. So if let's say, for example, during the Ottawa tornado disaster that happened recently here in this region, individual MNOs might be impacted in a given jurisdiction with one, let's say, having an issue in terms of an outage, but another tower site nearby with a second MNO would provide coverage in that circumstance. So it's the overlapping coverages but from the three MNOs, the major MNOs, and the additional regional incumbents, that when you stack together, provide the ability to bounce effectively to the best signal strength and the best network throughput given the circumstance. So it's the stacked reliabilities, when you add them all together, provide a superior net reliability.
But my understanding is the carriers do work together through the emergency preparedness system to do just that.
So similar, in similar vein to how the Rail Association noted, the stacked reliability concept provides the advantage, for net superior reliability. And I believe the Canadian Electricity Association, when they are before you later this week, will also refer to this concept. You essentially, you do obtain a superior reliability when you combine the net availabilities of those individual networks.
So a number of the parties that have appeared before us are certainly supportive of the public safety objectives and have indicated that some of these objectives are indeed being entertained at the moment, both with public safety and in some negotiations with the providers themselves. The suggestion is that it's premature and the Commission should wait until the PSBN model is agreed upon and adopted before we should be acting. Can you give me some comments on that view, please?
Certainly, and thank you. And just to address the first comment about the MNOs perhaps, or the carriers working in that space with public safety, to date there hasn't really been any dialogue in that. We have approached and we have asked to speak about this.
Sorry, dialogue with the service providers or dialogue with public safety?
Dialogue with service providers.
Thank you.
And so working in that space has been difficult and challenging to date, and I won't say that there has been zero, but they have not been substantial or productive. Yet we continue to see those very instances of which we've mentioned here today, of outages or the lack of reliability affecting our operations. And again, not just in crisis, but on a day-to-day basis. So the urgency for us is to move now and to speak about this. And this is why we're here today, is to really help solve that issue and hope that part of what comes out from these hearings is a greater collaboration with those providers.
Now, go ahead.
One additional point is that in terms of the timing is actually right in that the decisions surrounding the spectrum, and again, which would permit us to act in effect as a facilities-based MVNO, which some of the suggestions have been related to the HMNO and other models. Those decisions are happening in 2020, and so the timing is essentially aligned with the timing of the decisions surrounding the MVNO subject with the CRTC.
Thank you. When Bell was in front of us, however, they expressed a concern, and I'd like to hear your view about it, that it wasn't entirely clear to them that there was internal alignment, I believe was the term they used, that whether, and they didn't speak specifically to whether it was law enforcement agencies or electrical utilities, but they indicated that their experience was that sometimes the broader proposals were not consistent with the proposals or demands of individual members or subcomponents of the group. Could you comment on that?
We have two comments, and first I'll turn it over to the Executive Director of the Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police, and he will comment on that, and then I will top him up.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you, Commissioner. My name is Jeff McGuire, and as Anthony indicated, I'm the Executive Director of the OECP, and we have come on board. We represent the police services across the province as a professional and leadership entity, and also advocacy to government issues on all public safety matters that impact all police services across the province. That said, we have 46 municipal police services in Ontario, 9 First Nations policing services, and the Ontario Provincial Police. All of those are members of our organization. We've been involved in presentations from the group before you here today over the past year, and a motion was put forward 2 years ago at our annual general meeting to support this issue, which was brought forward by then Deputy Chief Nish Duriappa. And then following that, a motion was adopted in September of last year by our executive board to sign on as an advisor group to this very alliance that is here before you. So in fairness, you may be correct that there would be times out of the 56 police services where there may be one or two that don't always have the exact agreement, but I can tell you that we do represent the totality of those police services, and that agency, that's why we're supporting this group moving forward.
Thank you for that.
Just to top up, I'd like to say that the information provided by Bell, perhaps on that specific item, we would characterize as inaccurate. The PSBN Innovation Alliance grows by the day. Although at this point we cover 3 million Ontarians and Canadians, we know from even recently, Chief Duriap and I attended a conference in Vancouver just yesterday and spoke to hundreds of delegates, and were approached afterwards in terms of those who are willing to sign our document, our Memorandum of Understanding to join the Alliance, from East Coast to West Coast. So to say that, in fact, that there is support is the truth and is more accurate than there's not. We are a fast and very speedy growing coalition of interested first responders who want to collaborate in this space.
Thank you.
Secondly, I also noted, sir, that Mr. Bibick, and I'll paraphrase here, also said that if they come forward with a particular customer segment in a particular area of the country that could tackle better than we can, we're all ears. Well, we need to follow up on that. We are a particular segment in all areas of the country with particular needs. And so we will be looking forward to talking to Bell, Mr. Bibick, further about what our needs are. And I think he clearly stated that before the Commission, and we look forward to doing so.
And I encourage you to do so. I'll get into maybe a slightly more technical area in a second, but before I leave this, a little just back to the larger picture. You've suggested that your model also would it help bridging the urban-rural divide through the use of the hybrid MVNO model for a PSBN. Can you tell me how that works? How does that the case? Is it because, again, the stacking of the various providers? I'm just trying to figure out how you better serve rural areas if the rural area is underserved with facilities.
Thank you, and I'm going to turn it over to our technical experts. Before we do that, we believe there's several fundamental tenets of that model. One of which some exciting news that we just released yesterday was some work with Telesat, which we know will revolutionize the way we're able to use a PSBN and the spectrum to bridge that rural and remote broadband divide. Because right now, we feel that where there are not people, where people are not in clusters, where there are not urban centers, they are not greatly represented in terms of emergency response efforts via data, via our ability to use data and respond to them. And so that is where we partner with critical infrastructure agencies like rail, electricity, where they have existing infrastructures to run through those routes and add on to them and pave the way for other investment opportunities by MNOs. And I will admit the little deficiency in that, so I will turn that over to Mr. Trunco to explain. However, we feel that we've established a good model, far superior to what has been put out there to date, perhaps, which is not a lot in terms of public safety, in terms of our niche of public safety.
Thank you, Anthony. And Commissioner, certainly in terms of areas where there is a lack of MNO investment today, that exists because the MNOs are motivated by commercial profit reasons and margins, and hence they have not invested in those regions today. Nevertheless, notwithstanding that the infrastructure is not there, our members, our first responders, emergency responders, still need to respond to 911 calls. There have been inquests in scenarios in, for example, Northern Ontario, I believe in the Sudbury area, where lack of MNO access has resulted in deaths. And there are other examples that we can cite historically. And so in those regions where the MNOs have simply refused to invest because of commercial motivations, we would suggest that our partnership, which brings, for example, the Canadian Electricity Association assets from their members. We had one of our charts that indicated the fiber assets in Northern Ontario as an example, and there are similar cases in the other provinces, where those fiber assets would be a significant baseline of investment that already exists that we could leverage to lower the cost of bringing access to those rural and remote regions. And in turn, with our public-private partnerships, and as noted, we have received indications of significant interest in terms of investment, we would bring those partnerships to bear to pave the way, to bring down the commercial costs, and in turn allow MNOs to co-locate on our infrastructure that we would build in these remote locations. And in terms of that trifecta benefit that my colleague, the CIO of Mississauga, Sean Slack, noted, it also brings, besides public safety access in those areas for 911 response, it also brings the resiliency that members of the Canadian Electricity Association need for their purposes, the Rail Association members need for their particular needs, as well as provides a potential neutral host infrastructure or a method of monetization with, for example, First Nations communities who can also co-invest and reap the benefits for their communities, which would in effect provide a lower cost of entry for commercial entrants to come and co-locate and collaborate. So it's that P3 angle, it's the public-private partnership that brings those multiple sources to reduce the net cost that's inhibiting the carriers for deploying today.
It's perhaps more of a question for the electrical distribution representatives, but if they have fiber extending into rural areas and there's a lack of service by the existing MNOs, I just wonder why there isn't a win-win available there and why perhaps they're not working together to build out facilities that are mutually beneficial. But I don't expect you to answer that. We can raise that with the representatives of the CEA. So your proposal also seems to suggest that the Commission should set a different and preferential rate for public safety MVNOs than any other general rate it might set. Others have, not surprisingly, suggested otherwise. Could you comment on that? And then perhaps we'll talk a little bit about how a rate would be reached.
I won't speak to how a rate would be reached, perhaps, and I'll turn that over to my colleagues. And it's tough for me as an executive in the police department to sit before you and always lean on the fact that public safety agencies should come first and foremost in terms of not only financial and economics when it comes to data, but just really in all courses of response to emergencies. And again, this isn't just about emergencies, it's about day-to-day use. But that is a reality. And the demands from the community to meet expectations on public safety suggest that we have to use all the tools and resources available to us. And we've talked about in the near future what those resources are. And it will be, as my friend Mr. Krinko alludes to it, is a tsunami of data available to public service and public safety agencies to utilize in life-saving, mission-critical response. And so the consumption of that data is a burden on not only police, fire, and EMS, but also agencies that assist us, critical infrastructure agencies. And to provide that level of service to the community in a cost-effective way that minimizes the impacts to budgets, we feel that it is important to negotiate rates specifically for public safety to protect all of us. And I know that's a motherhood and apple pie statement, but in fact, that is exactly why we're here today.
we share in some of those motherhood and apple pie objectives. I mean, we serve the public interest as well, so I appreciate it. And I'll let your colleagues answer the other part of the question, but before we leave that, but if the commission sets different rates for different types of entities, you've made the case for why public safety should qualify. What do we do about the others who will make a similar case? Medical services, hospitals. I mean, we can go and make a list of entities or sectors that contribute importantly to society and to the general wealth, health, and safety of Canadians. And, you know, to use a tired expression, is this not a slippery slope?
Thank you, sir, and I do agree with you. It is a slippery slope in some instances, and I don't have the answer for you in terms of some of those other organizations or facets of society that require the same critical usage of data as emergency responders. However, in our model, we do indicate that not only critical infrastructures, but our partners in health are also have been provided by legislation access to the spectrum through public safety agencies. And so we feel that there would be a benefit to them with our endorsement of a PS MVNO, and they can capitalize on that.
Thank you. On the other part of the question?
Certainly, Commissioner, and so we would be certainly accepting of whatever the CRTC felt was fair in light of the societal life-saving role of tri-services, emergencies, responders, and also secondary and tertiary responders such as rails, transits, utilities. And so we don't necessarily ask for more than that, which is going to be granted, if it were granted, to any other particular MVNO. So first of all, we would be accepting of an equal standing with other MVNOs. We are simply suggesting as an option for the CRTC to further consider that perhaps an additional discount, given the societal life-saving role and the fact that all of us do benefit as Canadians from those 911 emergency services. So for that reason, we would suggest that a further reduction could be considered, but it's certainly not necessary and is not a requirement in our recommendation.
Thank you. Do you have any views, and I know it's not your traditional area of expertise, but we'd be interested in hearing any advice you might share on, for example, with commercial negotiation, backstop by a binding arbitration process. In your view, would that be the best approach or a preferred approach to reaching a rate? Or do you see an alternative approach? If you've been following the hearing, you might have heard discussion about either doing a retail minus approach or relying on our traditional bottom-up costing approach. Do you have any views on that?
Certainly. First of all, we would certainly prefer to have the CRTC backstopping those negotiations because of the market power position of the carriers. And as was noted, I believe, by the representatives of Rogers and the other carriers, you know, they certainly don't have an interest, as they've clearly stated many times, in enabling MVNOs. It's not their current position. So from a stance of negotiation, you have to have parties that have equal motivations to come to an agreement. And when one party is clearly indicating on public record that they have no interest, it's difficult to have those fair negotiations. And for that reason, we would suggest it'd be preferred that the CRTC act as that neutral intermediary and provide fair rates. Furthermore, the CRTC has visibility and confidentiality with respect to costing and true cost, EBITDA and other numbers. And so we think the CRTC would be best positioned to backstop those negotiations. And I think, furthermore, with respect to the model, our MVNO model really works because we do have access to band class 14 spectrum as part of what is sort of the intention of Public Safety Canada and ISED in terms of providing access to that spectrum in one way or another, ultimately to public safety. So it's our hope that that spectrum be provided to the hands of public safety to deploy as they see best for their particular municipal and provincial needs. And so we would be able to work along the full spectrum of essentially all, thus far, the MVNO scenarios that have been presented to the CRTC. So just noting the flexibility of that as well.
In the same vein, in your view, should any of the regional carriers be required to provide wholesale MVNO access?
So one of the options, again, it's because of this stacked reliability, the ability to have a digital right-of-way, so sirens and lights for data, the ability to get access in those times of crisis where minutes and seconds count to save lives. We would rely upon the CRTC for perhaps a staggered or a prorated, just as one idea, a prorated rate that could be differentiated between major incumbents and regional players to allow, perhaps a further facility for the regional players so that we don't overburden them. So we would defer to the CRTC for.
But there you're talking about a rate. I'm talking, I guess my initial question is, should they be obligated? So we've discussed, most of the discussion in this proceeding has been about requiring the three national players to provide MVNO access. My question is, under your proposal, would it be necessary to obligate the regional players to provide MVNO access?
We would propose to negotiate with them in terms of a fair market value, and again, backstopped by the CRTC.
Sorry, I don't know if we're just at cross purposes. You're talking about rate, I'm talking about an obligation.
Right. Well, certainly, I think that is part and parcel with, I guess, a secondary question, which is, are the regional operators going to be granted by the CRTC some sort of special status, a 5-year period, grace period, and so forth? It depends on the model, the particular MVNO model that is ultimately selected, if it in fact is selected.
Let me give you a more concrete example. In SaskTel territory in Saskatchewan, both TELUS and Bell ride on the network of SaskTel. If the Commission were to oblige Bell and TELUS to do something but not SaskTel, does this hold up for your model in other parts of Canada?
Again, we are flexible in terms of our model in the spectrum of MVNO scenarios. We would ideally ask to have access on all networks because again, emergencies have no, they don't have no distinction as to where they occur. So they could occur on regional players' territory. But again, the rate could be prorated by the CRTC to provide an appropriate rate for the regional players.
Thank you. So I have one last question. It's it's a very broad one, and you probably won't like it, but I'll ask it anyways. The industry department set aside spectrum in the last auction for public safety. We have a department, a Ministry of Public Safety, that is focused on these issues. One way of characterizing your request is you want to leverage all of these assets of a variety. You want us to oblige or mandate a number of providers to give you, if you will, pieces of a network that would then allow you to assemble a higher quality, more robust, reliable network for your purposes. And there is no suggestion that that is not an appropriate and laudable objective. But could I ask you if you don't think then that it's the role for other parts of government to assign to you or make available to you the necessary spectrum, and for you to work with your proposed partners, whether they be hydro utilities or railways, and put together that network for public safety purposes for yourselves?
No, we certainly are all about collaboration, both with our secondary and tertiary responders as well as the MNOs. We feel in light of the life-saving service that public safety and paramedics, medical professionals, firefighters, and policing, and again, those secondary and tertiaries provide, It's all about collaboration with the MNOs. So we would want to leverage their participation in a collaborative, cooperative fashion. So again, we're all about a win-win. We certainly want fair rates, and we would look to the CRTC to establish those rates. In terms of Public Safety Canada's involvement, perhaps if you just clarify that part of the question.
I'm just saying, to put it in the most basic terms, is this a problem for the CRTC to solve, or should you be out there building a network, getting the necessary spectrum, working with your partners, and building the network you desperately need and deserve?
Thank you, Commissioner. I think just to preface it, we have been for the last year or two concurrently working with Public Safety Canada and ISED in direct collaborations. We've regularly here and across the bridge in Ottawa with Public Safety Canada, and we have proposed to them a very collaborative hybrid model of utilities, everybody. So we see that as a concurrent activity to this discussion with you. I think the totality of our model that we're proposing, the outcomes of whatever the CRTC decides, along with the work we've done with Public Safety Canada to date on a PSBN model, will be the most fulsome, reliable backbone for emergency services in Canada. So I think we haven't had the opportunity to give you full line of sight of what we've been doing to date with the PSC and other elements of the federal government, but I can assure you that there are concurrent, really fulsome activities that are occurring, and I'd just turn to my colleagues if they want to elaborate there.
Our presence here before the CRTC is in fact to espouse one fundamental tenet of those concurrent working relationships that we have had with ISED and PSC, just in particular, those two government agencies. There are other pillars. I won't call them silos because they in fact are pillars of the model. But this is one key pillar of the model, and it speaks to the resiliency and reliability of, and not to mention the cost effectiveness, absolutely, of what we aim to achieve.
Thank you for
If
that.
I could just add to
yes.
participation with PSBN. So I had the opportunity to participate as a Federation of Canadian Municipalities representative on the consultation around the principles and use case for PSBN. And I can tell you the alignment in here as far as reliability and resilience as being principles for PSBN is very strong in this model here as well. And we continue to work with and collaborate with all of the agencies that have been involved in that consultation. So the alignment is quite strong.
One more thing, and I probably should turn it over to Mr. Trinko, who has written the academic papers, and a total of 7 so far that are peer-reviewed and looking to be published. Is that this isn't something where we've decided to appear here before you today to ask for a discount. And if it came across that way, that's absolutely not our intent. Our intent is to put forth really the fact that PSMVNOs provide us a level, sir, of resiliency and reliability. Certainly we think so. And that the cost effectiveness would be a benefit. In collaboration with Public Safety Canada and ISED and the temporary National Coordinating Office, group of 30 people made up across Canada, we anticipate their final recommendations. In fact, that was supposed to happen last week and may have a little delay. We anticipate their final recommendations on the use of the spectrum. In anticipation of that, we're here before you today looking for that support.
Thank you.
And the last part of your question with respect to dialogue and with ISED in terms of spectrum licensing, we are strong proponents of building those facilities and infrastructure. And again, it's two sides to the coin in terms of the model. One piece is that resilient, ruggedized infrastructure that can withstand those example cases such as Hurricane Dorian, providing, again, those skeletons of coverage that will be resilient, for example, when the big quake hits Vancouver. Again, the wildfires that we saw in Alberta where we had cell outages, and the cases go on and on. And so for that reason, we'd want to work collaboratively with the MNOs, have fair rates, deploy our spectrum to build facilities and infrastructure that also, again, the win for the municipalities that could be monetized in a neutral host infrastructure manner, provides also facilities-based infrastructure that helps foster competition, which is one of the aspects of this committee here. And the other aspect, the other side of the coin, is the MVNO piece, which is all about the reliability and resiliency angle, more so than the cost. The cost is a benefit, again, to society because it liberates resources for infrastructure and equipment, such as fire trucks and frontline staff. But we're not really focused on the cost aspect as much as the reliability and resiliency piece. So there's two sides of the coin. We're firm believers in building facilities-based infrastructure, and again, the MVNO piece is the other side, which allows some of those advantages on reliability, resiliency.
Well, thank you. We have a much better understanding of your proposal. Commissioner Levy.
Good afternoon. Just a couple of questions to follow up on the discussions that you've already had. You just talked a little bit about, this isn't about the savings, although there are going to be savings. Can you give us any kind of sense of what kind of savings you are looking at in this kind of proposal?
So certainly, Commissioner, we've undertaken studies, again, that we feel conservatively estimate, just as an example for the province of Ontario over a 20-year operational period, something on the order of between $2 and $4 billion. Which we've included in our submission to you, the original submission. And
is that the one that's over 20 years?
Correct, yes. Okay. And we feel those numbers are actually conservative in terms of all the parameters that we used in the model. We always gave the benefit of the doubt to carriers. And also, it depends on the exponential growth that is anticipated in terms of Internet of Things and the societal use of data. As noted, there's some significant changes in how the public will be engaging with public safety. To date, we're essentially limited to landline, well, there was a period where we were limited to landline phones, but now we are entering into a digital age where you'll be able to share video messages, you'll be able to share data files, SMS texts, and that's fast approaching over the next 3 years. In terms of that explosion, as 5G grows, societal use of data in turn increases the amount of data that public safety will need to manage and deal with. In terms of that load of data, we anticipate it will be so significant that certainly there will be additional amounts of data heading downstream to field-based first responders that are actually out there in the real world, as opposed to just at dispatching facilities. So we think that there is significant upside to those savings, again, depending on which side of the spectrum of growth that you anticipate for 5G use.
And my second question has to do with, you've talked from time to time about this being monetized and giving municipalities new tools and things like that. Could you give me some sense of what that might look like?
Certainly, I'll give you a few, and perhaps Mr. Slack from the City of Mississauga can also elaborate. In terms of the monetization for municipalities, there's a concept, neutral host infrastructure, which I think was alluded to earlier in one of the proceedings today, in terms of building a single set of 5G infrastructure in a municipality, again, for cost savings, but also because of the space constraints on municipal infrastructure in terms of mounting on lampposts, on other municipal held infrastructure. So building one set of 5G infrastructure that's perhaps held by the municipality provides them this neutral host infrastructure approach that could be monetized by reselling access to the MNOs. And so in that regard, again, we're talking about fostering competition. We're talking about building infrastructure. And so there's an opportunity for the municipalities to benefit from that as well. And I'll let Mr. Slack comment further.
Thanks, Phil. And so 5G is probably the example I would have used, where we see a lot of downward pressure on the built environment, the right-of-way as it is today, the infrastructure that's going to support 5G. And we think there's a real opportunity to collaborate with the proponents around the placement of 5G, looking at different infrastructure to facilitate the radio equipment, the electrical requirements, the backhaul, smart pole type technology. Because the challenge with the right-of-way is the amount of radio equipment that will be placed along the poles and the sight lines within the city. So beautification is actually a factor. So we really want to make sure that we're able to look at an infrastructure and smart pole technology and the right power and the right backhaul that could support a resilient infrastructure, but also create opportunity by having a shared infrastructure within the right-of-way within the cities. But I can give you a specific example of savings. So within the region of Peel, and actually many of the partners at the table here, we have built out over the last 20 years the public sector network, which is a fiber infrastructure which supports fire, police, the region of Peel, the 3 municipalities within the region. We connect the hospitals and post-secondary. And the annual savings, this is annual for within the region of Peel, is $10 million a year, $10 million in operating costs. So over the life of the last 20 years of building that fiber infrastructure, we've saved over $100 million in operating. So these types of models can work. And so that's a shared infrastructure model. And it really does demonstrate, building a resilient infrastructure and collaborating with partners can save money.
Thank you.
Commissioner Leisner.
Good afternoon. May I start by thanking you for the excellent work you do in keeping our communities safe. When we had CN Rail before us earlier this week, they mentioned that one of their concerns was the inability to get service-level agreements with the MNOs, that they were only offering service-level objectives. And I think I heard you talk about, in discussions with MNOs, just getting agreement on a best efforts level in terms of agreements with them. Is that an accurate assessment?
Yep. Bill, go ahead.
I think that's an accurate assessment. And so to compare that paradigm to how we operate our other critical communications infrastructure, such as our land mobile radio system, and including our testbed PSBN, which is throughout our region, we're contracted for like 5 nines of uptime, basically, which is unheard of in the commercial world of commercial broadband.
So why is it that you can't get service level agreements with the national carriers? What is the reason that they give you?
My understanding is that it comes down to designing networks to meet certain coverage and loading and backhaul demands. And there are differences in doing that. So you might design a network to meet a certain purpose of reaching into an area, but not necessarily for peaks and things like that, or investing in generators and that sort of infrastructure. The way that we look at it within the Halton region is, and we use our voice radio system as a parallel to that, is that we enjoy 99.96% coverage outside anywhere within Halton region on a portable on the hip of our police officers and firefighters. And that sort of coverage combined with that reliability is, we have not had the ability to contract that with a commercial carrier.
Oh, sorry, Phil. I just want to add one more example within the region of Peel. Caledon is a partner in our fiber infrastructure. You only have to drive 2 minutes south of Caledon to get no coverage, zero coverage. So that's within the GTA, within a fairly large urban center. And it's because there's no commercial incentive to put that kind of coverage there. So these are the types of issues. If you're a first responder, no coverage is not good enough.
And sorry, one last thing, Commissioner. It really boils down to the design principles, the engineering principles that are used. And certainly the MNOs are motivated by commercial interests and want to deploy where, as was noted by Rogers this morning and the other carriers equally, they desire to build where they can maximize profits. We, however, have to operate wherever emergencies occur, and they can occur in areas where infrastructure is not overbuilt. There are areas of Canada where the MNOs have overbuilt capacity, but as they noted today as well, they rapidly exhaust those resources, so they rapidly fill them up. And when those resources are either filled up or they're inadequately provisioned in areas because it simply doesn't make economic sense to overbuild everywhere, it's in those circumstances that we have surge conditions. So if you think about it, for example, on the Trans-Canada Highway, you'll have a set of infrastructure, but you won't necessarily have sufficient capacity to handle the surges that could occur when there's a multi-car, 100-car, pile-up of vehicles in, let's say, a winter crash, where those individuals then are trying to access a single cell site that could be in a remote location. So in our case, in those examples, which also exist in urban areas. So again, as noted by Mr. Slack, there are areas even surprisingly in southern Ontario, in the densest area of Canada for population, where we do not have sufficient coverage in terms of signal strength, or where emergencies can rapidly provide surges in terms of commercial use that overwhelm the capacity of those sites. So we need the ability to deploy an overlay of ultra-resilient, reliable capacity that we have the ability to access in those places. And again, we are not motivated by profit, but rather by being able to deploy where we need access in those societal life-saving moments. So that's the difference in engineering design philosophy.
Thank you.
Thank you. I believe those are all our questions. I was going to thank you for taking the time and for sharing with us. We certainly share your public service objective and understand it. You'll need to leave the rest to us, but there is no doubt about what your objectives are. I appreciate it, and as the Vice Chair indicated, we also appreciate what you do for Canadians every day. Thank you for taking the time, and with that, we'll adjourn. As the hearing secretary mentioned, we will start 30 minutes later, 9:30 tomorrow, given the weather circumstances.
Exactly. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.